Bueno, buenas noches. Hoy tenemos la clase número 1. So today we are having our first session, class number 1, for this conference training program. Now I want you to take your notes and I want you to write down your questions because we are going to have a Q&A before we start doing the practicum. We will take a break after all the presentation. And I believe this is set to go in Spanish. That's why I'm not sure. But anyways, write down your questions and please do not leave the session with questions in your head. Your question could be somebody else's own. All right. Now you can feel free to close your camera because I'm recording at this point, and to ensure that your face or so forth is not shared. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Okay, good. Okay, so in this session today, you will identify interpreting techniques, very important. Explain professional standards, and that's going to be mostly like a homework that you will have on the platform. We will analyze the responsibilities of an interpreter. We will be talking along that way, discuss the rights of an interpreter, and then we're going to be talking about copyrights, work environment, and so forth. But more importantly, we want to introduce the profession itself to you. So I want to start by making sure that we understand that being bilingual and being an interpreter is definitely not the same. However, a bilingual person or multilingual person can definitely be an interpreter. It's not the same the other way around. It does not happen the same way, vice versa. So what is interpreting? So as you see on the screen, you basically give a message from a source language to another language. So let's say from language A to B, and in some cases, even from your language B to language A, depending on your proficiency. Now, what happens with this message that you are conveying is that you have to be very accurate, not so much into when it comes to word by word, but in terms of message, communicate the message. You have to ensure that you share the emotions. And there's something very important which happens mostly in the translation industry, which is localization. When you say localization, for example, that means that you will use this term that is specifically known to the audience. So you have to localize your terminology even when you are doing your interpretation. For example, if I would say in Spanish or French, I don't know, I'm going to get the elevator, and you are interpreting into English, you need to know if in your audience you have British persons mostly, or Americans of New Zealand or so forth. So then you will know if you have to call the elevator or lift. So it's very important to convey the message, but then you also have to be as accurate as possible to ensure that your audience does not have to be second guessing. So let's take a look at interpretation techniques that we can use to convey that message. Make sure that you take your notes. All right, so the most difficult one for everyone is simultaneous. We love it. We conference interpreters love it. It's when you speak in real time. This is the highest level of interpretation, as you have to train your brain to listen and speak at the same time, right? Now we have whispering. Whispering is very similar to simultaneous because you have to listen and speak at the same time. But in this case, you have someone in the audience that has been identified by as a person who was unable to understand the presenter, and maybe there's no interpretation equipment. So the interpreter is asked to sit next to the person who's in need of interpretation and speak softly. Now, simultaneous is very demanding, but whispering. Could you imagine having to speak simultaneously, softly? After 45 minutes, is scientifically proven, the brain starts getting tired. You need oxygen. That's why we use 2 interpreters per booth when we are interpreting simultaneously. However, when you have to whisper, how long can you go speaking softly without being heard? Can you imagine? So there are ways of training yourself to continue to speak softly, and there are techniques to ensure that your brain continuously has the oxygen needed to be able to stand longer the process. We also have consecutive. The most common form of consecutive that maybe you know is court. In court, you have consecutive interpretation, which is also at some point, let's say on a trial, it's a kind of mixed with liaison. Why? Because liaison or negotiation or bilateral in some cases is called, it's the interpretation mode where you have to go back and forth. So at the end of the course of this series 1, you are expected to become a liaison interpreter, which is one of the easiest. And you probably have been doing it as a bilingual. You probably were at a hotel and somebody said, "Where's the bathroom?" And then you go back to the person and say, "¿Dónde está el baño?" Or "¿Cómo te llamas?" So you go back in French and say, "Comme tu t'appelles?" And something like that. So this one is when you go back and forth, but then the issue here is that how can you train your brain to go back and forth without speaking Spanish to the Spanish speaker and English to the English speaker, which could happen if your brain is very tired. Now, we also have the special case of sight translation. Now, sight translation is basically when you are scanning a document with your eyes. And while you are reading in this specific language, you are able to speak out loud in this other language. So let's say you speak English and Spanish is your second language. You are reading the English words, but then you are saying the Spanish words out loud, which is actually the way in which we start training simultaneous interpreters. Now, it does not give you much time to think. So could you imagine French and Spanish have a different grammar structure where you have nouns, then verbs, then adjective, but then English has it sometimes backwards, adjective, then noun. So you have to be able to scan the document all the way to the end of that sentence in order to organize your ideas and start conveying the message properly. So these are the techniques. Of course, we always have schools of thoughts that always try to introduce all the techniques, but these are the main techniques that have been historically known to be used in interpretation. So in order to start getting this interpretation mode in your brain or get you used to it, we are going to do a quick exercise. And then we will continue because we want you to interact as well, okay? So right now we are speaking about the rights of interpreters. And although we are going to go deeper into it after we read the ethics document, I wanted to bring this scenario where, let's say, an interpreter was requested services from a couple of days before, even the night before, as an escort to accompany someone for an interview at the American Embassy, for example. And once the interpreter gets there, then the client decides that they no longer need an interpreter because maybe somebody said, "Oh, there's a Spanish-speaking person at the window." Normally what best practices would advise you to do is you send your terms of service. Normally you want to send a quote. Once the quote has been approved by the client then has to abide, whether the quote was agreed by email or even by WhatsApp. Once you have proof that the individual has agreed to utilize your services, especially when you have to make arrangements to accommodate that person, you should be able to demand payment as per the agreement. So do not ever go to an appointment to do a job without explicitly saying the terms of your service and your fee. You always announce your fee in advance, and you always ensure to let a client or the prospect know your terms. Preferably what we do, we request a deposit. In some cases, depending on the type of client, we even request a full payment in advance. And there have been cases, for example, when going to court, full payment in advance was requested via wire. And upon arriving to court, the case was adjourned. Then 50% of the advance funds were refunded. So it's very important, even as you are learning the profession, that you understand your rights and that you also know how to proceed when you find uncomfortable circumstances or unforeseen circumstances. So now let's talk about proficiency in delivering your message. Remember to never accept a job that you personally know you're not qualified for. And if you know your second language has flaws, you do not want to work as an interpreter, especially simultaneous now. I'm not talking about liaison with you, when you can manage how you say things properly. Let's say simultaneously, you do not interpret into a language when you don't have all of the grammar, and when you cannot speak that language as good as your A language. So if, let's say, you speak English as a first language and Spanish is your second language, and you're very good, you're awesome at Spanish, but your mind is not quick enough for you to produce the information simultaneously, but you understand it so good that into English you are awesome. So you want to ensure to accept a job to interpret from Spanish into English, which is your more comfortable language. Now, let's say you have a booth partner who needs to drink some coffee and they're doing a roll call, like they're calling the countries. Oh, the countries are fine. You know, make sure you say the name of the countries into the proper language. So that's one aspect. Another thing I want you to consider is when you are taking training, you normally are a part of a cohort and you want to identify the persons in your group who specialize in other areas. So let's say you are a foreign language teacher and you receive this proposal to interpret, but then when you read the information about the event, it's going to be medical. But you know, when you went to classes, somebody who's a pharmacist who has the medical terminology down pat. So you want to make arrangements with that person. And let's say if it is a conference, then you let them handle the technical presentations, and maybe you do the lighter presentation, or maybe you find two persons who are proficient in medical terminology and you just serve as the conference manager or as the person organizing the service. But one thing you never want to do as an interpreter is oversell yourself, because You might want to make all of that money at that point, but might be the last contract that you get. So always ensure that you are interpreting into a language that you are completely proficient in. So let's talk about times in which you are not very familiar with terminology, but perhaps you want to take on the job. Let's see what happens. So, and you can close your cameras if you want to, since we are recording now. So you don't want to limit yourself just because there is an opportunity in an area that you've never worked before. One of the things that you want to do as an interpreter, you want to become very inquisitive and you become a researcher. You learn to research. So let's say you know that next year, March, the Bahamas will be hosting a conference on green standards. So before I decide whether I'm going to be a part of that event or not as a professional, I can say, well, let me look into green standards. Okay, waste management, smart cities, okay, roaming, telephone industry. Okay, let me see which of these areas I can manage. And then I start reading and finding information. Then normally when they start announcing events, they will have either the topics or the presenters, or you can see who were the past presenters for the last couple of years. And that gives you an idea of what could happen during that event. So you say, okay, I will just research and prepare myself because I want to qualify for this event. Normally, companies will audition their interpreters unless they do have already interpreters who are proficient in this specific area. But we always want to audition because we don't know what happens, what may happen last minute. Sometimes clients request 2 interpreters because they only need 1 plenary session, and suddenly they decide that they are going to do a work group and whatever else. And then next thing they have 2 and 3 rooms and you need more interpreters than you originally thought you were going to need. So you want to train, you want to research, you want to take a look at the different type of conferences that normally come to your area or region. And of course, while we are still have to put together the association for the Caribbean, try to see what are the closest or nearest associations that may have events and or gatherings that you can benefit from. So don't limit yourself to just what you know. Make sure you're proficient in what you know and that you advertise yourself for what you know. However, you want to prepare yourself to be proficient in other topics and qualified to work at more events with more topics. So do not limit yourself. Keep an open mind, but always work on your professional development. Because as an interpreter, you will find that your brain will open and you want to know more. And you start reading and you want to research and you want to find this information. Next thing you know it, you're watching a video. Nowadays, you could go for a walk and exercise and listen to a presentation on a specific topic. You don't even have to read. And then that helps you to start becoming proficient by listening and listening and listening continuously to the different topics. So now let's talk about the different individuals that we normally require at a conference. You will find a conference manager. The conference manager is someone that generally is multilingual, but it does not need, that person, he or she does not need to be. If it's a conference manager for the hotel, because they do have the language team to do the language part for them. But if the conference manager is working on behalf of the foreign language firm or agency, normally we will require our conference manager to be multilingual, especially proficient in one of the languages of the conference. Now, the conference manager is the person that will be responsible, for example, for registration of the equipment. You normally have, let's say, we have a conference of 300 persons and we have to distribute headsets. So somebody has to be responsible for that. And the technicians are too busy ensuring that the sound is properly, is heard properly. So while technicians can help in the conference management team, the conference manager is this person that goes to the client to ensure that interpreters have presentations on time, that the conference manager ensures that interpreters have water. They ensure that the language team has lunch on time. We're gonna have a session about what to eat and not to eat, because sometimes you could eat food that makes your brain lazy and slow. And remember, we are speaking about a conference because our main goal while we are here finishing the liaison interpretation series, the main goal is to get to that conference inside that booth. All right. So that is a conference manager, is the person who will liaise with your language team and with the clients and the technicians. So they are like a hub, right? Why is it important that the conference manager speaks one of the languages of the conference? Because emergencies happen. And while a conference manager might not be someone very proficient in simultaneous interpretation, they might be required to sit and fill in for one of the interpreters for a small session, like light content or something like that. Or sometimes when we work as partners, we do have, we help each other. So when one interpreter is delivering, the other interpreter is looking for terminology. We use a lot of stickers, and what we do with the stickers is that we post terms and we find acronyms. So because you understand your need as an interpreter, then you start looking for information to help your partner. That's why we say you don't want to sound better or worse than your partner. Both of you have to deliver the message accurately, because when one interpreter fails, the booth fails. So if one person is interpreting, then the other one is looking for terms or ready to take the mic in case the interpreter has a need. Okay. Now, there are some things that we do and we don't. We don't wear strong perfume when we are working with others. We have to be very mindful. It's almost like a marriage when you're inside that booth. But think about it also when you are escorting, when you are accompanying someone as an interpreter. Imagine if you wear a very strong perfume or cologne and your client keeps sneezing. They will demand a refund, because you should know the do's and don'ts. All right. We also ensure to dress professionally. You don't want to become a distraction. And then also, in some cases, there are very cold settings. So, you want to be properly dressed. You always ask for the dress code. Generally, we wear white on black or full black for conferences, mainly since you're going to be working many hours. But we normally want to be identified as a professional working. So we normally wear a black suit. We don't wear jeans to work unless you are who you have been advised that it's a light event, or if it is a casual, but you always want to ask. if it's okay to wear jeans. You don't assume, unless you wear those jeans that look like pants. Okay?
Yes.
So before we close the session, I just wanted to remind you that interpreters speak in first language, so in first person rather. In the first person, that means that whatever the speaker is saying is what you're going to repeat. You don't get involved in the he said, she said. You will speak exactly what the person is saying. You will transmit the emotions of the person who's speaking. If they are very happy, you want to sound happy. If they sound mellow, you need to sound mellow, and so forth. If they sound painful, you need to ensure that your voice sounds in a similar mode as well. So you also ensure to localize the terminology that is suitable for that specific context. You don't want to add or take away. You want to be direct and say exactly what the speaker meant. In cases in which you are escorting someone, remember, before you decide to ask the person, you have to determine first, what type of interview is this? Or how am I working as a liaison person? Am I a cultural mediator today? Is this person life depending on me? Or is this person next level or opportunity depending on me? If it's a level, opportunity, a visa depending on you, you have no business adding or taking away information. However, if something is not clear, that the example I used the word deck, you said deck, the deck was not specified. Depending on the situation, you might decide to say it's should I ask, or if it's an interview for a visa, for example, you just don't volunteer like that, because more than likely the person will ask what kind of deck. If it sounds confusing, then you use your cultural mediation skills, but you have to be very keen and understand the settings and what's allowed and what's not allowed in different situations. If you are interpreting for a very sensitive matter, such as a rape matter, or something that you're totally against. Let's say you are a feminist, but then is a male speaking like a full macho man. Or let's say you are against some other rights or inclusive terminology, but then you have to interpret. You do not get your emotions involved. You deliver the message. And if it is a situation that you don't want to be a part of, then you should not have accepted that job in the first place. So always inquire, what is this job about? What would it entail? What are you asking me to do? And that's why you want to send your client a quote, inclusive of terms and conditions of service with your do's and don'ts. So remember these points as you go over your ethics text, and I will see you in session 2.